Hello, and welcome to From Hobby to Full Time, a podcast for personal stylists who want to take their side hustle a lot more seriously. Whether you're starting, growing, or expanding your personal styling business, this is your go-to resource plus accountability circle to get things done. I'm Sydney, a personal stylist and business coach with a different point of view. Here, you'll find tons of practical, real advice with a hefty dose of magic for your entrepreneurial journey. Ready for it? Let's go! All right, now that intro is out of the way, at some point I will systematize that. But for now, because it's going to be on YouTube, I want it to be all one straight take, since you also have the option to watch a video. So for this podcast series, we are diving into and talking about money. I really wanted to talk about something that is maybe a little bit taboo, that people don't really talk about, and that would help give practical, real advice and kind of uncover the curtain a little bit when it comes to talking about this. So this is a 3-part series called #The Money Diaries, and we're going to talk about your money. So episode 1 is all about getting practical with your money. I figured the best place to start was at the beginning. So I am endlessly fascinated by the inner workings of people's lives, how they decorate their homes, what they drive, where they get their clothes, how they eat, and obviously how they deal with their money. And I figured you might be too. For some reason, we tend to treat money and financial conversations like this big fucking secret that no one should ever talk about. And in a way, I kind of see this like alcohol consumption in the US compared to abroad. There is kind of this underlying knowing, right, that in the United States, we forbid people from drinking alcohol legally until they're 21. There's a big whole thing about it. And when people go to college, they tend to binge drink if they haven't already started before, because they're getting finally access to this quote unquote forbidden fruit. Whereas if you look abroad, there's a lot less of a taboo around alcohol. It's present. People talk about it. Younger children may have a few sips of wine at the dinner table. It's a thing that's just always around, and it's very normalized. So when people abroad finally reach quote unquote legal drinking age, there's not a lot of binge drinking. They're not trying to go after this forbidden fruit, and there are much lower rates of dangerous alcohol use or misuse than in the US. So when we talk about money, I feel that it's the same way. We get into a lot of debt. My cats are jumping on the table, sorry. So the video is shaky. So we get into a lot of debt. We don't know how to deal with, hi baby. Just kind of dropped her. All right, cats are aside. All right, so with money, we get into debt. We don't talk about it. We don't know what we want to make, or we don't know how to spend our money. We don't know how to save. We find ourselves in circles of debt, which I will share with you my own personal stories about that. And I have found the number one way to get out of this cycle and these habits and behaviors is to talk about money and to be super practical with it. And it will 100% reduce your anxiety around money and enable you to start making more of it. Whether you are working on personal budgets or you are listening to this from the business side of things, getting comfortable around your money is going to be the number one thing that's going to help you. So in this series on money, I'm going to start there. I'm going to start with the real, practical, tangible situations. I'll answer a few questions on my thoughts about budgeting, prioritizing expenses, and tackling debt. And I'll let you in on how I set up my own accounts, give you a downloadable personal money tracking sheet, and I'll share real life examples of how I deal with my money. Now, this is a disclaimer to end all disclaimers. This is not financial advice. I'm not qualified to give it, but I do have some stories and life experiences that may be helpful to you. And I would highly recommend you take some of this information back to your accountant or whoever you trust to help you with your money to implement what is going to work best for your personal situation. So let's start with budgets. This is everyone's favorite topic. I was always raised to save money, to always spend cash, never have debt. This is going to come into play in episode 2 when I talk about triggers, shame, and guilt. My mom used the envelope system with us and my siblings, which basically means that anytime we got cash or money, we portioned out what we wanted to go where according to a formula. So as kids, our system was 10% went into savings, 10% to charity. So at the time for us, that meant a church tithe. And then 10% went to something else. So my example was I always had a car envelope to save up money to purchase a car when I turned 16. Flash forward 20 some odd years, and I use an electronic version of this method now to help me budget, feel abundant, and put my money where I want it to go so that it's working for me. Here's how I do it. I'm going to give you 3 pointers, and then I'm going to go into detail about each of those. For the first one, I create a main yearly and monthly budget. And I actually call this a personal money tracker sheet. That feels a little less restrictive, less punitive, a little more abundant than calling it a budget, because I'm not necessarily putting in a budget so that I don't spend money. I'm putting in a budget as guidelines for where I do want to spend my money. This allows me to see what's coming in and what's going out, and I can make educated, informed decisions about all of my money. 2, I set aside time weekly to look at all of my accounts, pay bills, and check in on investments and savings. 3, I use that electronic envelope system that I was talking about to automatically transfer money to different accounts so that it grows without me thinking about it, and so that I always have money in certain buckets for what I want when I need it. Okay, so this might be a lot. I'm going to break down each of these things for you all in a little more detail. Let's back it up and talk about the budget. So I really do have to thank my sister Hannah for the template that I'm going to share with you. I use this template now weekly, and I love it. The best thing that I love about this new template is that obviously I'm tracking expenses, but I've also added in an income area, right? So your situation is going to be different from mine. I have probably 4 or 5 different areas where I'm getting money. So I have my own business, I have a part-time job, I have freelance jobs, and I have some other things coming in as well. And I want to track that and know where that is coming from and how much is coming from it. And then I also donate a percentage to charity, which we'll talk about, but that's also why I want to know my income and track it. But secondly, the biggest thing that when Hannah shared this spreadsheet with me, she tracked everything and categorized it, and then put those categorizations in an auto formulating column so that you could look easily at your category and know where the money was going. So I'm going to give you an example of this. In December, last December, I spent $166 on eating out. There's nothing good or bad about this number. Yours may be much, much higher. Yours may be much, much lower. But I know for me, that's not where I want my money to be going. That's not where I want that much money to be going. So by using this budget spreadsheet, knowing that I had $100 for eating out and then that I spent $166 means I need to be more aware of saying yes to certain things, or choosing to eat out when I maybe would rather choose to eat in because I want that extra money to go to somewhere else and not have it go to consumable goods. I don't beat myself up over it. I use this as data points, again, to make educated decisions based ultimately on my goal. So when I'm working with my money tracking sheet, I track all of my spending, right? Whether it's cash, whether it's credit, Venmo, and all of that. I put it in my sheet. I put the date, I put the category. So you're gonna have to sit down and think about what categories, but you'll see this in the downloadable template. And that way I'm able to then, from the full on list of expenses, have categories that I'm then putting things in, and it's auto totaling for me. This has been a game changer in terms of knowing just kind of where the money's going. For example, I would much rather stock up my savings and stock up my travel budget than spend it on eating out. So if that means hey, I'm not going to go to a coffee meeting and spend $10 on coffee and vegan blueberry muffins, which I did a lot in December, because I want to put some of that money towards travel because I'd rather have coffee in Portugal or whatever the case is. So that's how I do my budgeting. I've always had not always, but for the past several years, I've always had some sort of budget to be able to figure out what the heck is happening with my money. In the past, it has been very stressful. And one of the main things that has helped me overcome some of the stress around money is what I'm going to talk about, number 2, my weekly review. So every week, I sit down and I have it in my calendar. It's a reoccurring standing meeting with myself, if you will. And it takes me about an hour to do all of this. But what I do is I log my income. I transfer my 10% to charity. I log expenses. I write down what I spent on my credit card. I pay the bills, utility, rent, etc. Pay my credit card, and I categorize everything in my sheet. I also take this moment to look at my savings so I can see how it's growing week over week, and I check in on my investments. Checking in on my investments is something that's a little bit newer to me. I've always had, whether it was like a 401k or I've had like a Roth or IRA, but I haven't been as heavily involved personally in those things. And that's my goal for 2020, is to take a little more charge of that. And to get used to that idea, to get comfortable with that, I need to look at my investments on a weekly basis at least, so that I can see what's happening. This doesn't necessarily mean that I'm changing my investments or I'm doing everything. I'm just building awareness and practicality around my money so that I'm comfortable with it. So in my weekly review, doing it every week, it makes it normal. It takes away the fear and panic that may set in every time you think about logging into your bank account. And trust me, I used to avoid logging into my bank account like the plague, and thinking about money would send me into panic attacks. I did not have a good handle on my money. I was always worried about it. I was stressing about it. And this is one of the tools that has helped me to feel better about my money and feel more abundant. We will talk about this a lot more in episodes 2 and 3, so stay tuned for that. One of the things that has stuck with me that I have incorporated into this weekly review is Catherine Zinkina of the podcast Manifestation Babe. One of her tools was when she was like $25,000 in debt, making maybe like $1,000 a month. She was not comfortable with money, but she would have what she called Money Mondays. So she would make a whole thing, essentially my weekly review, but she would put on good music, she would have coffee, maybe do a drink if you're doing this later in the day, light candles, any way to make the idea of looking at your money as something fun, not something to dread. And when you can begin to do that, when you can normalize it, you're going to start to peel away the layers of the anxiety that you have around money. It's going to be very uncomfortable the first couple times you do it, especially if you have a lot of debt or you do not have a lot of money in your account or you're living paycheck to paycheck. But the first step to helping you get to a better place with your money and your financial situation is to be aware, so that then you can make a plan and then you can act accordingly based on your goals and based on where you want to go. So I will make a note here that every time I use my weekly review, I also use this time to check in on my business account. So we are really talking about personal budgeting. And I do my business bookkeeping separate on a separate day because that's a lot more in-depth, a lot more details, and I do that about once a month. But I like to just check in on a broad overview of the accounts. Check in on my tax money that I've set aside, check in on my bank account, check in on my credit card account, and then check on my credit card where I have some debt that I'm paying off. I want to be able to just know what those numbers are, to be aware of them, that if I happen to have a little bit more money, I can throw some money at the credit card debt, or I can make, again, educated awareness and decisions around my money. Now, here is where for me, the fun and the magic comes in, is number 3, the electronic envelope system. So from my main monthly budget, like I talked about, I also kind of have a rough yearly budget, or I know some yearly numbers. This lets me set up a monthly budget so that I can then set up my envelope system. So here's an example of the math that goes into this. I usually get about 4 haircuts a year, and that equals out to about $340 a year, including tip, which means if I set aside $30 a month, totaling $90 every 3 months, which works out math-wise, that when it's time for me to get my haircut, I just pull $90 from an account I've created within my big bank account, and I don't even have to worry about the money being there or worrying about, hey, do I have the money to get a haircut this month, because that money is in an account. So every single month, because of this electronic envelope system, I'm transferring $30 into an account that I call grooming. And you'll see all of the different sub accounts I have. I'm going to just show you. I get to nickname them in the bank I have. I transfer $50 a month to a pet account so that I can buy food. And when they have their annual pet visit, I know that I'm going to have $300 stashed away, ready to go. And it's not something that I'm going to have to pull from emergency savings, or I'm not going to have to scramble. I'm not going to have to cut elsewhere because they've already stashed the money away for them. I transfer a big chunk of money every month for health and wellness. And so for me, this includes health insurance. It includes therapy sessions. Hopefully it's going to include some massages because it's a little bit more of a number that I need on a monthly basis. But it's allowing me basically to buy into my future wellness, that when I get $85 built up in there, I can schedule a massage. I set aside $150 for travel. So this way, every 3 months, I've got like $450. I could buy a plane ticket somewhere. Or say 6 months go by and someone invites me on a trip. Depending on whether I've used that money or not, I've got a big stock of money ready to go. So you can also always start really small in these accounts as well. And you can work your way up. $5 transferring every month, $20, $50 at a time. I do like to start small sometimes, and then as I either gain more income or as I realize, hey, I'm not spending as much money as I thought, I can actually up my savings, or I can up my travel budget. And another way to think about this is that, say you want $4,000 a year for travel. That may be a lot and maybe not a lot. Just pick a number and then divide by 12, right? So that means I need to save $335 a month if I want to, at the end of the year, have $4,000 available for me to travel. I can spend it if I want. I cannot spend it if I don't want. And I know that that's going to continue to grow. So I shared this method with a friend, and they texted me and said, I'm over here opening accounts left and right. This has totally changed the way I do finances, and it's so different than how I usually budget. And I personally love this method because it lets me feel like I'm in control of my money. It lets me work with what I have while still actively saving and stashing aside money. So let me really quickly just talk about the logistics of this. I have a national Wells Fargo account. To my knowledge, within Wells Fargo, you don't have very many options of setting up what I'm calling sub-accounts. So I also have a credit union account. And the credit union for me is a local bank. You may have one where you live. And they allow me to open as many accounts as I want under my name, under my social security number, within my membership for them. So when I started with them, I opened up one main checking account because that's how I got started. And then online, I could just open up however many accounts I wanted. So I opened up and have had probably like 8 or 10 accounts. And these are accounts that I know I want to stash money aside for. So if you're comparing the budget worksheet with some of these account names, not everything on my budget worksheet has an envelope system or has a sub-account. So for example, I'm not pulling in, say my budget for groceries is $400. I'm not transferring $400 or $100 a week into a grocery fund right now. I used to do that. I used to pull out cash so that I had it for groceries. But that's not necessarily an area that I want to stockpile money in. But the ones that I do have that I want to save up for are things like wellness, like I talked about, the health insurance. I have a gift fund so that I put money in there every month so that when friends or families have gifts, I've got money in there to draw from. I have my charity account. I've got travel, emergency savings. I have a car account, a home account, my pets, my clothes and care, and my grooming. So these accounts, I have all set them up. Some of them are checking, some of them are savings accounts. That doesn't really matter. I do like to have my bigger funds, say like travel and emergency savings as savings accounts because the credit union gives me like a dividend. I get like $1 on it or whatever it is every month. But do note that if you're going to be regularly transferring money from a savings to a checking account, my credit union has rules that I think I'm only allowed a certain number of transfers every single month. So again, this isn't why necessarily I'm not going to make an account for gas or I'm not going to make an account for groceries because I'm spending that more regularly than some of these other accounts that I have set up. So I love having these accounts because they function as my envelope system. And every time I do my weekly check-in, I look at these accounts and I'm not transferring money every week. So for example, my method is I transfer emergency saving money twice a month, and then I make one transfer a month automatically set up from my general checking account. So my general checking is where my paychecks go into. for everything. That's where freelance money goes. It gets deposited there. And I then pull from that account on a regular basis. So as part of my weekly check-in, I also look at my transfers and say, okay, I'm transferring like $500 is getting transferred out. Double check, make sure that's in my checking. And then just know it's going to get transferred. And then next week when I have my weekly check-in, oh my gosh, I've got, $500 now in travel savings. And that was only $350 last week. That's so exciting. One of the things I love about this, especially now with my charity account, there's actually, I think, almost like $500 in there. And to me, at the end of this year, at the end of 2020, I'm going to have a decent chunk of money in there. It's going to be a couple $1,000s. And I'm going to get to donate that to a nonprofit or a charity that I want to help support. And that's really exciting to me. One of the things that I think this does is it lets you get excited about how you're spending your money. For me, I love seeing that travel account grow because I get to think about trips I want to go on, or if I have a trip planned, I know that I have the money there for it and I'm not freaking out. I personally love to see a lot of money in emergency savings. I like to have that as security. And so when I look at that, that also helps calm down anxiety or panic that I may have had in the past about money. Knowing that I have that chunk there lets me know, okay, something crazy with my car comes up, something crazy health-wise comes up. I've got the money in these accounts to pay for that. So when you have your weekly check-in, when you're setting up money in a way that maybe is like this or a way that works better for you, for me, I have found that has 100% helped my anxiety and helped me put to normalize my money and have it be have it be a thing that on a daily basis, on an everyday basis, I can just look at and I don't want to say rest assured or be secure in, because nothing is ever necessarily 100% secure, but it helps reduce the anxiety and lets me know that I have a plan of action in place. So I have a few questions that I got from Instagram that I want to answer, and maybe a little bit more detail than I've already done. First question was your thoughts on budgets. So I think I've made it clear that I love budgets, but I do like to think of them as money trackers, right? Or as like, whatever you want to call it. Sometimes the word budget to people can feel restrictive, or it can feel like it's not as fun and they don't like to budget and think of budget as a negative thing. So I title my spreadsheet a money tracking spreadsheet because that's what I'm doing. I'm tracking my money and I'm telling it where I want to go. And these guidelines are helping me feel really awesome about how I'm spending my money, where I maybe want to save more money, and all of that jazz. So I love it. All right, next question. How do you prioritize your expenses? What comes first? What comes last? So in my money tracking sheet, when I am listing out my bills or things I have to pay for, I tend to always list like set expenses, set bills first. And I think that's a pretty common budgeting thing. I don't know. I'm not a financial person like you or anything, but it kind of makes sense in my head, right? Like I'm always going to have to pay my monthly rent and mortgage, cell phone, internet, utilities. So power, electricity, water, gas, recycling, trash. Those are like set. They're not really going to change. Well, they may change in price, right? Your utilities may change in price, but a lot of times you're always going to pay them. And so I do like to kind of also then over budget a little bit. And then if I come under, that's great. You could put that extra money somewhere. But that way you're also not worried about, say, for example, a lot of times in the winter, power bills can go way up, or like in the dead of winter, or the summer, they're up because you're spiking your AC a lot. So just keep that in mind. And then I'll tend to list other things that I know I'm always going to spend money on, but that may be a little bit more variable, such as groceries, gas. And then I'll do savings, health insurance, things like that. And then after that, I'll do more expendable income items. So those are things like clothes. I like to have a clothes budget, guys. I want to spend money on clothes. And so for me, having that clothes budget, say I have $100 in there and I want to buy a top for $85, and that may be like a lot of money for a top, but I've got the money, I can do it guilt-free, right? So that's another thing I think the envelope system does. But when I was in a really tight money place a few years ago, I would basically just cut out those expendable categories, right? So based on the money that was coming in that I could see, because I was listing out my income, and then I knew what the bills were, and I knew I just didn't have room at that time to say, put $100 in the envelope for clothes. that was realistic of where I was. I probably should always, or would recommend always, try to put a little bit of money, even if it's $5 or $10, into those accounts, because at some point you're going to need to buy clothes or you're going to need to do something. So it's nice to have a little bit there when you do want it. But also, those are places, expendable areas that I could cut out of my money tracking. At the time, I just called it a budget, that I could cut out of a budget when I need to. So those are things that come last for me. But I do treat my envelope systems as basically like set expenses, right? Like that money is always getting transferred so that I always have it. So to me, it's not necessarily what comes first, what comes last, but it's just kind of looking at things holistically and knowing how much money is coming in, knowing that I'm going to be able to make those transfers. So there was also a final question on that there are so many schools of thoughts when tackling debt, credit cards, student loans, car, etc., where to begin. So again, this is not financial advice, but I do believe it is important to systematically cut down debt. A lot of people have student loan, they'll have maybe a mortgage, they'll have a car payment, and then a lot of people have credit card debt. So I was very fortunate that I did have I had student loan debt, and I had an inheritance from my grandmother that paid that off. But prior to that, I was treating it like any other hard bill, and I was paying $400 a month on my student loan from the get-go. I was also fortunate at the time that I had two incomes, and that helped pay the bills. But I do believe in paying what you can every month. So I'm going to give you another example. With my business, with Chic Stripes, I have roughly right now maybe $3,000 on a credit card that is debt. That is separate from my actual credit card that I pay monthly expenses on, that I then pay that off every month. This was debt from purchasing courses, from investing in things, and probably I would say a year ago, that was about $6,000. And I had a plan in my head. I was like, if I pay $400 every month on this, I'm going to get this knocked out really quickly. Now, that plan did not actually come into reality. I couldn't pay $400 a month on it, but I paid every single month what I could. And that was usually at least $75. So over the course of a year, I paid down $3,000 on that credit card debt. And I'm continuing to do that. And that's part of my weekly review that I check in. And I see, okay, can I pay $100 on that this week, or do I need to stick with $75 based on my other expenses? I do try very hard for my personal spending, and now moving forward in my business, to try to avoid credit card debt at all costs. I personally would much rather pay off charges every single month. If I don't have cash to pay for something, I really avoid putting it on my credit card. And I say this as someone who has gone through 2 cycles of $10,000 to $15,000 each in debt with a partner. And I know the anxiety that comes from credit card debt, and I don't like that. I would rather save up the cash to buy something and then put it on my credit card when I know that let me back up, that got lost. I would rather save up the cash to buy something than put something on a credit card just to get it and then have to work to buy that thing. I want to work first, have the money, and then the freedom to just buy it. I had another thought that I wanted to say about this. What was it? Oh, to the business debt. I will say right now that debt is sitting on a 0 interest credit card. That is one thing that if you do have debt, that I have done in the past, is transferred balances, put it on a 0 interest credit card. Yes, you do have to pay a bit of a fee to get it over there. But if you can go a year on a $6,000 debt on a credit card and not pay interest on that, that to me is the wiser choice. And that to me takes away the anxiety. But that I treat a little bit different as well, because that's in a business. In my head, that's business. I'm paying it off. There's 0 interest. It's just another bill that I am having to pay right now, but it's a bill that I'm paying, compared to continually racking up personal credit card debt. I cannot do personal credit card debt. It just freaks me out. And I've had it before, so I know how it feels, and I don't like it, and I'm going to do everything I can to avoid it. So my thoughts on tackling debt is to do it as systematically and consistently as possible. There are definitely, I think you can Google and research to figure out like what you should tackle first. I believe usually it's like high interest things, because you want to knock those out as much as possible, right? Don't pay money you don't have to pay. But the biggest thing on debt is being aware, knowing exactly what it is, and making a plan to knock it out. Anytime, so back to those 2 cycles of the 25K in debt that I had personally with a partner, when I was made aware of that, I made a plan. And I said, okay, every month, this is going to it. And I would track it on a spreadsheet. I had the balance at the top, and then I would have the date and the minus whatever money we paid, and I would have a total at the bottom that summed up and let me know, hey, there's, $600 left. Oh, hey, you made a $200 payment. There's $400 left. To me, seeing those numbers change and checking in with them frequently was very, very helpful and very beneficial to staying consistent with paying down debt. That's my thoughts on that. I have a few resources I want to share with you because I think they are important. If you are local to Richmond, I would highly recommend RebelCon, the conference. It is a boutique conference for women centered around lifestyle design. And one of the core topics that we always talk about is money, because money is really important. We have had some amazing speakers that have helped me not only personally, but also professionally think about my money and think about how I'm treating it, think about how I'm working with it, and also helped me figure out business-wise what I need to charge. So if you are a personal stylist and you have no idea what to charge, you have no idea how to make your business actually profitable, to take it from part-time to full-time, to take it from hobby to full-time, there is a whole module on money that will give you a breakdown to help you figure out what you need to charge to actually make money to pay yourself, right? If you are just randomly charging, this is a rant, but if you're just randomly charging $50 an hour, you're not going to be able to go full time. So this is really important resources that I've gleaned from RebelCon that I'm passing on to you. And if you are able to attend, I would highly encourage it. So from RebelCon, I met and heard from Priya. She is the owner, that's her name. She is the owner of Stash Wealth, which is basically helping millennials revisit their financial situations and get their act together. She just talks about things in a very easy to digest way. She helps you make a plan so that you're aware of your money and get to your financial goals. She also made us aware when she talked about a program, I think this is the correct one, but it was called Debitize. This will be in the show notes for you. But it was a way to make your credit card act like a debit card. Friends, if you're having issues with credit and you want to get out of the cycle, I would really recommend this. I have not used this myself, but I love this concept because it goes back a little bit to my envelope concept, right? But essentially what it does, it connects your credit card and your debit card. So when you make a purchase on your credit card, it pulls money from your debit account, actual money, and sets it aside so that that money is there for you to pay your credit card bill. I think this is fantastic. Obviously, yes, sometimes we have credit cards because we're making larger purchases or we don't have all the cash in hand or you want to get credit card points, which is totally fine and awesome, but have the money to back it up and pay off that bill. And I think finally, lastly, as a resource, most importantly, find a system that works for you and that you're going to use. For me, this kind of almost old school money monthly tracker and an Excel spreadsheet, a Google Excel spreadsheet works for me. And I'm constantly making small edits, small revisions and adjustments to that so that I can make it better. Because your tools are only as good as ones you're going to use. If you have Mint, which is an app on your phone, but you don't use it, then it's not helping you track your money and make better decisions. So I really hope that this episode on money practicality has been helpful for you, that you can start to think about your money as a awesome tool that's going to help you get to where you're going. And that more importantly, you're going to start normalizing your reactions and your conversations and your interactions with money so that you can reduce the panic, the fear, the anxiety, and the lack of control that you may feel around money and start to take that narrative back. So this was episode 1 in a 3-part series called The Money Diaries. Stay tuned for next week where we are going to be talking even more about money. We're going to be talking about triggers, shame, and guilt around money and what to do about it and how to make it grow on trees. That is going to be a fun episode, so stay tuned and I will see you next time. Bye.